All right, today we're diving into a legal case that is, honestly, part courtroom drama, part psychological puzzle. It's a landmark ruling all about law, lies, and a divorce that went completely off the rails. So let's just start with the one question that sits at the very heart of this entire story. Can you sue someone for a fraud that you, yourself, admit you helped commit? I mean, it sounds like a paradox, right? A real legal catch-22. And this wasn't some hypothetical law school problem. Nope. In 2011, the Indian Supreme Court had to unravel this exact puzzle. And their decision in this one case would go on to set a precedent that still echoes in courtrooms today. So to really understand the court's final decision, we have to go back to the beginning. Let's get into part one, a divorce with a twist. The people at the center of this were not your average couple. We've got Inderjit Singh Grewal, an assistant professor with a PhD, and his wife, Amandeep Kaur, a lecturer who was also working on her doctorate. They got married in '98, had a son a year later. By all accounts, a highly educated, professional family. Now, the timeline of their separation seems pretty straightforward at first glance. They said they started living apart in 2005. 2 years later, they both filed for a mutual consent divorce. By March 2008, it was a done deal. But then, look at that last date. 14 months later, in May 2009, things are about to take a very sharp turn. And this right here, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle. During the final divorce proceedings, the wife made a sworn statement to the court. She said, quote, all disputes regarding dowry articles and alimony had been settled. She confirmed everything was resolved, no more claims. She was agreeing to the divorce, period. And this wasn't just a verbal thing. She received a payment of 300,000 rupees as permanent alimony, a final settlement meant to close the book on all their financial ties and disputes. On paper, this was a clean break, a done deal, agreed to by everybody. But as we know, that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. So let's move on to part two and see how this supposedly settled divorce exploded into a full-blown legal storm. So 14 months after the divorce was finalized, the wife comes forward with this bombshell claim. She alleged the entire divorce was a fraud, a sham transaction that she had agreed to as part of a scheme to help her now ex-husband move to the United States. And this wasn't just one complaint. She launched a multi-front legal attack. A domestic violence complaint, a civil suit to get the divorce thrown out, another application for child custody, and she even filed a criminal police report, an FIR, for cruelty and breach of trust. For the husband, this must have felt like an absolute onslaught, a clear abuse of the legal process. With cases piling up in different courts, the whole mess eventually escalated all the way to the top, the nation's highest court. And that brings us to part three, the clash in the Supreme Court. The whole complicated mess really boiled down to this: two fundamental legal principles on a collision course. On one side, you had the wife's argument. Fraud unravels everything. It's a powerful idea, right? If the foundation is a lie, the whole thing comes crashing down. But on the other side, the husband's counterargument: you can't benefit from your own wrongdoing. He said, hey, she admits she was in on the fraud, so she can't turn around and use the courts to punish me for it. So, how does a court choose between two such powerful ideas? Let's get to the verdict. Part 4, the court's final word. The Supreme Court reached way back into centuries of legal wisdom and centered its whole ruling on this ancient Latin maxim. It looks complicated, I know, but its meaning is simple, direct, and just devastatingly effective. It translates to, a person alleging their own shameful act is not to be heard. Basically, the court brought out what lawyers call the unclean hands doctrine. If you come to the court asking for justice, you can't do it with hands that are dirty from the very act you're complaining about. It's like, you can't be the one who started the fire and then call the fire department asking for help. So the court's reasoning was crystal clear, broken down into 3 key findings. First, they said she was in the wrong forum. You can't use a criminal court domestic violence case to attack a civil court's divorce decree. It just doesn't work that way. Second, unclean hands. By her own admission, she was a party to the alleged fraud, so she wasn't entitled to any relief. And third, they called it an abuse of process. The court saw her using the Domestic Violence Act not for protection, but as a way to refight a divorce that was already over and done with. And the conclusion? It was decisive. The Supreme Court didn't just dismiss her complaint, they quashed it entirely. They didn't mince words either, calling the whole attempt to let it proceed a travesty of justice. So, the case was decided, but its impact was really just beginning. Let's move to our final section and look at how this one case built a landmark legacy that continues to shape Indian law. See, this ruling wasn't just about one couple. It cemented three powerful principles into law. You cannot use a criminal case to sideways attack a civil court's decision. You cannot come to court asking for help when you're admitting you were part of the problem. And critically, laws that were designed to protect people cannot be twisted into weapons for harassment or to get a second bite at the apple in a settled dispute. But, and this is what's so fascinating, the law is a living thing. It evolves. A small point in this 2011 judgment suggested a one-year time limit for filing domestic violence cases. Well, in 2022, the Supreme Court took another look at that specific point. They clarified that the one-year limit doesn't apply to filing the initial application, only to going after someone for breaching an order. It's a perfect example of how the court principles of a ruling can stay solid as a rock, while the courts carefully fine-tune the details over time. Which brings us to our final question, and the one this case really forces us all to think about. The law is there to offer protection and a path to justice. But in the tangled mess of human relationships and arguments, where do we draw the line between using the law for what it's for and abusing it as a weapon? That is the question this case leaves us with today.